Hello, book lovers! I'm Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novel Atomic Anna, and you're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. Check This Out is a series where I interview emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. A series brought to you by New Hampshire Public Radio and our brand new partner, the Penn Faulkner Foundation. Penn Faulkner administers major literary awards and public programs, including the Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction. We have a lot of really exciting books and authors coming your way this spring. Next week, I talk to Tova Mervis about her debut thriller, We Would Never. Tune in next week for that interview. Today on the show, my guest is Julie Iromuanya, and we are discussing her brand new novel, A Season of Light. A Season of Light is set in contemporary Florida, but the heart of the book is in many ways in Nigeria. You may recall that in 2014, 276 girls were abducted from their school in Nigeria. And this is where the novel starts. This horrific, brutal act sets Fidelis off, sends him spiraling into madness and memories of his time as a child soldier in Nigeria. In Florida, in the throes of madness, he locks his daughter in her bedroom, offering no words of explanation. Amara's brother is dragged down alongside with her, but in a different way. Soon the brother and sister are conspiring to run away from their family and from the generations of trauma they can't seem to escape. In this novel, the injuries the characters suffer from are internal, the lingering effects of war. As I read, I kept asking myself, how can anyone in this book get better or find a way out? The author, Julie Iromuanya, doesn't offer answers, but she did leave me thinking that even if there isn't a cure for this madness, in her new novel, A Season of Light, starting the conversation is what the book is really about. After all, talking, sharing, admitting what her characters lived through is the hardest part and the only way forward. Julie, I am thrilled to have you on my show today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Rachel.
Julie, your brand new novel, A Season of Light, is beautiful and also difficult to describe because there's a lot going on. There are different characters with different things happening internally, externally. How do you describe your novel, A Season of Light?
I describe my novel as a book about intergenerational trauma. So it's really a book about the ways that younger people, successive generations, carry the traumas that their families carried before them. And the book is all about the ways that the characters have to work to undo themselves or free themselves from that trauma.
So it's heavy
Yeah.
in that sense, right? Nothing light about this, but you look at intergenerational trauma through these characters. So how do you describe them when people ask you and you're standing in an elevator?
So in the book, the drama essentially starts when Fidelis Enrique finds out about the kidnapping of the Chibok schoolgirls. It's sort of like a moment that kind of takes him back to the past, and all the things that he hasn't dealt with in the past, they come to the fore. One thing in particular is the disappearance of his younger sister, and it really spirals into questions about whether or not the sacrifice was worth it for him and his family, and all of that results in his desire to protect his daughter from the same fate as his sister. And so he locks her into a room and determines to never allow her to leave the room in order to protect her.
Can you read a passage for us so we can hear your voice?
Sure. Armed with a shotgun, Fidelis went looking for his daughter. Neighbors stood on porch stoops and overgrown strips of lawn, watching with relish. Everybody's family had been a spectacle at one time or another. Some families once a week. A drunk shouting obscenities at his kid for failing a grade, a girlfriend rushing out the door with a pot of hot grits to dump on her philandering boyfriend, a schizophrenic nephew singing off key into a bent spoon, and once a pit bull howling, howling, howling at the moon inconsolably until his festering agony was cut short by the single report of a revolver. This time it was the Enrique family's turn. It had only just begun to rain. Whispers of water would turn to shrieking showers by midday, and a brooding sky castigated by lightning would fill them with wonder. But for now, the neighbors were blind to any distraction, focusing instead on the powerful dissent of a father who believed that some man had carried his daughter off to some place where sisters and daughters could never be found. Fidelis had only gone halfway down the hill when he spotted Amara on the horizon, alone, partially shaded by a tree. It was a lovely sight. He laughed with relief, but when he neared, she had an inexplicable expression on her face. Had she sat there so still all alone through the night? Looking fearful, as if she had eaten the last piece of goat meat set aside for him after a long day of work, she ran to him, as she had when she was a small girl. He wanted to playfully chide her. He wanted to groan and bellyache about his hunger. But then he recalled her eyes when they had met in the middle of the road the night before. He felt grave. At that instant, he loved her so completely that he believed his heart would burst, for she had saved him. Now he must do the same for her. As she wept, he sheltered her in his arms, told her it was a strange, sad world. Adam, my daughter, you will never be alone again, you hear, he promised. You will never be without my protection. That afternoon, Fidelis reinforced Amar's bedroom window with a padlock and secured her door with his presence.
Just beautiful. Thank you. You really read beautifully. So, this book starts in Florida, but really the heart of the novel beats in Nigeria. What is your connection to Nigeria?
So I am the daughter of Igbo Nigerian immigrants. My father came first to go to the university, and then my mother followed later to go to university as well. So I actually grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. That was where I was born and raised.
And what is your connection to the Civil War that haunts the characters? Do you have one there?
Yeah, yeah. So my father was actually a soldier of the Nigerian Civil War as a young man. He was not a child soldier like Fidelis, but he was a soldier of the war. And my mother was a child of the war. So she had one experience of the war, and my father had a different experience of that war. And that was one aspect that I wanted to bring into the novel.
Did they talk to you about it when you were growing up?
Very little. So there were all kind of stories. I knew my father had wounds on his body from an injury during the war, but I didn't know the whole story behind that. And my mother sometimes would say, "Well, I heard that this is what happened, but I'm not sure either." And so really a lot of one of the things I was interested in with this book is that there are all these silences and omissions around the experience in the war. For a lot of people, that generation, they wanna put it behind them and move forward, especially when they have new opportunities in front of them, and so for the Enrique family wanted for them to be forced to face that.
Right, because there's always this question, you as a child, you think you know your parents, but actually you don't at all, and there's a lot of silence there, and so some people are happy with the silence, and some people want to dig in and find out what's there. So, did you find yourself asking other family members or digging around, or how did that go?
This book is really, in a way, filling in the gaps and silences with a lot of research, a lot of fiction, imagination. So, some of the research I did was I went to Nigeria, I went to the National War Museum, I went to the Nigerian National Museum. So, different places to like look at artifacts of the war, learn about people that were part of the war. I listened to stories from family members. I did a lot of archival research. There's a lot of really great footage that's available online in lots of different places. And so I kind of collected all those pieces together, almost like scraps, and sort of put them together.
So you traveled to Nigeria, you did a bunch of research for this. You sort of wove together some of your own experience with all of this research and real life history of what happened in Nigeria. But you uncovered some scars along the way. I'm assuming you found some from your own family and from others. How did it feel to be uncovering those scars? And as a writer, you have to make decisions. What are you going to include? What are you going to leave out? How was that process for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the process, for me, when there are scars that I see, I often don't just try to duplicate those scars in my work. I usually try to ask questions of those scars, like how did it come to be, why, those kinds of things, especially like really, really tough questions about things. And then I use my imagination and some of the research to kind of weave together an answer to that. Pieces of my experience going through the museum and touching these artifacts and learning about these people with my parents' own separate experiences as a soldier and as a child of the war, and places where there were erasures and omissions, I started to imagine and create a story about a family in crisis. And in a way, I kind of see myself in all of the characters, and like there are facets of myself in each of the characters. So one of the facets is that the Chibok schoolgirls, when they were kidnapped, that was something that just stayed with me for a very long time. I had nieces around that age and younger sisters. And so in a way, one of the ways that I accessed Fidelis as a character was by thinking about my own struggle to sort of process what was happening to these girls across the world in my ancestral home in Nigeria.
So you're talking about in 2014 when 276 girls were kidnapped from their school. It was this horrific moment, and you start the book with that. That is the inciting incident that sends the family into madness and these depths of horror, really. Why start with that event? What was it that really drew you in to that moment?
Coincidentally, it actually wasn't where the story began initially. I began in a different place, but when that happened, and I think it was had a lot to do with me trying to process it. A lot of my writing is from trying to process things that I don't understand or that are hard to conceive. And so when I sat down to write, that's what started to come out of me. And then it was thinking about, okay, this is something that happens in 2014, and then the war that happens in 1967, and it's sort of like the spark that begins the journey that the family has to take.
But you started somewhere else entirely when you were writing.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm always trying to be a little bit, I don't wanna be on the nose with the way that I enter a story, and so actually the story began initially through the relationship between Amara and Maxim. So Maxim is the son of a former a POW of the Ukrainian Soviet War. So I was interested in that story, and then as I continued to write, as the world evolved and changed, then the story also changed.
So how long were you working on this novel?
Oh, I started working on this novel before my last book was sold, so around 2012 is kind of when it began, and then it started off just in small little snatches and sketches and things, and then over time I didn't know it was a novel at first for quite a while, and then over time it developed into a novel.
If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. My guest today is Julie Iromuanya, and we are talking about her brand new novel, A Season of Light. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. Julie, in this novel, you have a cast of characters, of real life people, a family that is living in Florida, but there's also a ghost. And for me, she was the driving force of the novel. She was a main character, and yet we never really even saw her except through the eyes of others. So, can you talk about this ghost?
Yeah. So Ugochi is the baby sister of Fidelis. She was at home when he left to fight in the war, so he enlisted and left her behind. And with the intention of winning this war, coming back to this newly seceded nation of Biafra. But when he returns, she's not there. She's gone. Part of the story for Ugochi is the Biafra airlift. So during the war, Gowon, who was the leader of the Nigerian nation, used a blockade as a tool, and that blockade caused starvation. So starvation was essentially this weapon of war, and it led to this huge humanitarian crisis that hadn't been seen at that level around the world, especially with the explosion of media at that time. So the Life magazine cover with the starving children of Biafra, eclipsed the world. And then as a result of that, different relief agencies, religious missions flew in to Nigeria to come and provide a relief aid. But at the same time, during my research, I found out that they were also taking children and the infirm and flying them out. Ogochi was one of the children that was flown out. One of the things I learned during my research was that there were children who were taken out, some who were too young to even speak yet, who were not returned to their families after the war.
And Ugochi is the sister of your main character, Fidelis, and so she essentially disappears, and that disappearance haunts the entire book. And the father, Fidelis, literally everything that he's thinking is sort of overshadowed by her and the entire house, and yet we don't even see her. And so what is it like to write a book when you don't see this main character, and yet she's in every single scene? How do you do that?
I mean, I think I felt her in, like, different kinds of touchstones throughout the book. So one touchstone is actually Amara, Fidelis's daughter, because Amara looks so much like Ugochi, and that similarity between the two of them is part of the reason why he has that strong desire to protect her. So she's in that place, but she's also in, like, this juxtaposition of the memories of the past and also almost like the memories of what could have been. And so there are these moments where Fidelis is imagining possibilities for who she could have been and what she could have done as a mother, as an adult. Adobe, who was also good friends with Ugochi as a child, Adobe the wife, she has memories of these times when Ugochi was around. Ugochi, who had this sort of, she was this mischievous kind of child. She played Cupid and brought them together, Fidelis and Adobe. And so there are memories of that.
And she's just always there in every scene, and yet that's not really the plot of the book. The main plot, if we just simplify it, flatten it to its most basic, is Fidelis is triggered by this kidnapping of the 276 girls in Nigeria. He's living in Florida, and he's triggered, and he has to protect his daughter. That's all he can think, is that he has to protect her, and he does it by locking her in her room. He's going to wall her off from the world and keep her safe. And yet, all I can think is that protecting her? She's basically a prisoner in that moment, a prisoner of her father, but he thinks that he's protecting her. Talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the questions of the book is that divide between protection and possession. So, Fidelis believes he's enacting his duty as her father, as her patriarch, to make sure that she's safe. And he feels that he failed in that duty toward his sister. So, his parents died, and so he was left in charge of his sister. And then he feels he failed in that. So, he overcompensates for that by his desire to protect his daughter. But the novel kind of spins on whether or not that protection is actually a form of possession. And so part of the novel is also coming of age. Amara is growing up before his eyes, and he has to reckon with that as well. And I think this happens with a lot of parents and their children, where there's like you kind of have to loosen your grip and allow them to be free and make their own mistakes and things like that. And Fidelis is kind of, he kind of has a tight grip on her out of fear.
So did you in your mind, did you go back and forth between thinking this was possession, that she was, being imprisoned, or this was protection? Like, how did you think about that as you're writing it? Because I imagine it was hard to read, to think that this young girl, she's 16, 15, that she's stuck in her room, but her dad truly loves her.
Yeah, and I think I mean, I moved across different characters had different viewpoints of it. So they brought different, different eyes to the situation. Adobe is a really interesting character because she kind of oscillates between both of those positions, seeing it as a form of protection, but also seeing it as captivity. Amara obviously is trapped in her room and she feels very much like she's captive, she's imprisoned in her room. And her brother, Chuk, is, he really doesn't know what to think of it. He knows that something's very wrong. And his family, it's a source of shame for him, but he doesn't really understand his relationship with his father evolves as a result of the things that are happening. And so he also has to go through the process of trying to understand what's happening and what it means.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to a minute for you were talking about this being a novel about coming of age. We're talking about a season of light here. And one of the things that Fidelis sees that really sets him off is he sees Amara, his daughter, putting on lipstick. And this is partially where he makes the connection to his own sister. And really, what we see as the readers is this razor thin edge between girlhood and womanhood and this transition. And Fidelis, as a parent, is trying to manage that, control it, even though it can't be controlled. And this lipstick is what sets it off. And it has me thinking about women's sexuality, that razor thin edge between girlhood and womanhood. How did you think about that? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in the beginning, it's not the first time Amara has worn lipstick or dressed up. She's getting ready to go to a dance at school. But because of the kidnapping of the Chibok schoolgirls and the connection to his sister's disappearance, he has great fear about her growing up and growing up being beyond his grasp and beyond his protection. And so he tries to hold on to that. Now her sexuality, Amara's sexuality is a really important part of that because that's, sexuality, reproduction is a part of growing up. It's a part of your development. And so throughout the book, there are lots of moments where Amara has to seek that herself and try to understand it for herself in ways that are beyond her father's grasp.
And this whole time, Amara is in her room. She's imprisoned by her father, but of course, she has her brother and her mother sort of walking the hallways. They know what's happening. And I kept waiting for one of them to break her out. Save her, save her. Talk to us about what the mother is thinking and how she goes back and forth on this throughout the book.
Yeah, Adobe is an interesting character. And what she brings to the story is that she knows a lot of the history. So Amara and Chuk don't have much of that history about what happened during the war, the father's imprisonment during the war. Adobe knows that. She also knows about who he was before the war. She knows that he was a poet and he was not a person who, would be attracted to violence and all these things. So she sees different sides of him. So in a way, she's trying to fill in those gaps. So she's the person initially that comes into the room and kind of goes back and forth between Amara and her father. And she hopes to placate, hopes to placate him and placate Amara, and kind of eventually she kind of thinks we'll just sweep this under the rug and this will eventually resolve itself and we'll go back to normal. But then she quickly realizes that that's not the case.
Right, so we still have Amara in her bedroom, and she's sitting there for hours and hours, and she's asking herself, "Who stole my life?" How am I going to get my life back? And I want to ask you to read a passage for us so we can talk a little bit more about this.
Okay. Each day, the ghost of her aunt had stolen more and more of her father's life from him, and now her mother's. In the process, she had robbed Amara of hers too. When her father looked at her, when he spoke to her, when he chided her, it was not to her, it was to his sister. Even as his lips formed Amara's name, it was not to her whom he spoke. I am Amarachi, she thought. Who is Amarachi? She felt effaced. The prison had never been the four walls of her bedroom. All along, the prison had been Ugochi, and those girls, and those precious little girls. Amara was their prisoner. Amara was her prisoner. And what was freedom? Willing herself to erase the words, Amara stared at the page, her pencil tilted to the leaf again. 4 more words. A proclamation. Ugochi did not survive.
It's so powerful, that passage. Thank you for reading. And this question, what was freedom, is really something that plagues every character in this family. I think Adobe, the mother, Fidelis, the father, Amara, the daughter, and the son, Chuk, are all asking, what is freedom? How did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I thought about how their own different definitions of freedom and how they were forced to face and have it essentially challenged throughout the narrative. When the parents, the parents reunite after the war, they come to America, they build this life for themselves that is essentially their American dream. Fidelis becomes a lawyer, he's very successful. Adobe is a music teacher. So all the things that they'd hoped for are finally realized. They live this very opulent lifestyle, or at least they imagine it to be that. And that's their version of freedom. But it's also like a masquerade because there's so much they've been hiding from. There's so much from the past that they have put behind them, and now they have to face that. And so the true freedom for them is a discovery of kind of reintegrating the things that happened in the past with the present in order to face a new future.
I love that you were talking about they think that they have freedom when they have found success in America. So Fidelis becomes a lawyer and Adobe is a music teacher, and they have sort of the trappings of the American dream. And yet that's not really freedom because they're still held down by these memories, by the ghost of Ugochi, of the war and what they experienced in Nigeria. And so how do they find real freedom? I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. My guest today is Julie Iromuanya, and we are talking about her brand new novel, A Season of Light. So, the main plot, on a very surface level in this book, A Season of Light, is a father, Fidelis, is triggered by the kidnapping of 276 schoolgirls in Nigeria. He remembers his experience with the Civil War in Nigeria and descends into madness. And he imprisons his daughter in her own room, but he thinks he's protecting her. So, this big question hangs over the entire book. Is she being protected? Is she being held captive? Is it a prison? Is it safety? What is it? And all of it, of course, is controlled by Fidelis. So, Julie, please tell us about Fidelis.
So Fidelis was a child soldier of the war. He enlisted really about the same age as his daughter Amara, and he fought in the war with, like many youthful people at that time, hopeful for a new Biafra. But he ends up becoming injured during the war, and he's imprisoned. And when he comes out, he starts a new life with his wife Adobe in America. But the past is not behind him; it's something that haunts him.
And he takes his 16-year-old daughter and he puts her in her bedroom and closes her off from the world. And he's mad. He's descended into madness, and I feel bad for him because he has these horrible memories and he's trying to work through them. But I also don't like him at all because of what he's doing to his daughter. So I go back and forth. And, I largely see him as an unlikable character. And yet I feel so bad for him. What was it like to write his character for you?
So actually, my favorite characters are those characters who are really, really messy. So I love anti-heroes. They're some of the characters that I gravitate to the most when I do my own reading. And so in the book, I really wanted to to spin on something that is so reprehensible, right? But to try to imagine it through another lens. And I think that's what like anti-heroes and kind of really messy characters allow us to do. They allow us to see human foible in all of its dimensions. They present a different way of seeing the world, which I think is really, really valuable and important. And so I often try to skew towards the unconventional, something new or something different. And so for Fidelis, it's really for me was about rooting myself into him as a character and trying to see the world through his kind of hazy lens. So he kind of sees the world askance, and we have to see it through his vision and try to understand it.
So how do you dig into an unlikable character? Because you have to spend a lot of time with him, right? So how do you do that?
I think there's just something that happens when you're sitting with a character and you kind of embody them. And so like with all of my characters, there's a piece of myself in them. And I think with these unlikable characters, I can tap into ugly aspects of myself. You know what I mean? There's a place for that in these characters.
And Fidelis is really trying to protect his daughter, but in a sense, he's trying to protect his sister, Ugochi, who's the ghost. And so you really see that he loved his sister. He wanted to save his sister. And you contrast this relationship with Amara and Chuk, Fidelis's children. And they have a very different relationship. They're more antagonistic. They're more jealous or competing for their parents' love and approval and attention. And I don't get the feeling that Chuk wants to protect his sister the way that Fidelis wanted to protect his sister. So can you talk about those contrasting relationships there?
Yeah. In stories, I always think it's interesting when you have weird triangulations. So in the book, initially, in sort of in the backstory, Fidelis and his daughter have a very close relationship. She's very doted on, while as Adobe, the mother very much dotes on Chuk, her son. And then that kind of reverses as a result of the things that have happened. So Chuk then begins to develop, he really, really, he's always desired his father's affection and pride and love. And his father's always been quite hard on him, while Adobe has typically been the one that's very hard on Amara. So as the story progresses and this conflict ensues, Chuk starts to see that if he does his father's bidding, then he will receive his love and his pride and his affection. And that sort of initiates some of the conflict between Chuk and Amara. Amara has always been the favorite, and now he thinks he has a chance to be the favorite.
And I kept wondering, would he save his sister? Would he feel that same guilt that Fidelis felt for his sister Ugochi?
That's one of the things he has to struggle with over the course of the book, and part of it has to do with separating himself from his father and the way he wants to be seen by his father. In order to do that, once he does it, it enables him to see what's really happening, and the shame and the secrecy and all those things that he's experiencing, it forces him to recognize, to have some recognitions about what's happening in the family and also his role in the family.
So, Julie, in your novel, A Season of Light, we have Amara, the daughter, the 16-year-old, who is in a literal prison. Her father has closed her off in her room. We have the 276 Nigerian girls who were abducted and are held in a prison in Nigeria. We also have the mother, Adobe, who is in a sort of prison of her own. She's trapped in the past and she's trying to find her way out. She finds a pastor. She sort of goes through all these different machinations and ups and downs herself. Tell us about Adobe.
So Adobe is in the family the person who, she's really invested in appearances. So this idea that they've made it, they've come to America, they're successful, and so she sort of carries herself and walks in that way. And then when these things happen, part of the secrecy is built around her desire to keep up appearances. So she stumbles upon this pastor who he's going from door to door, trying to share the news about his church. And when she sees him initially, it's like a moment. It's almost like it stops her in her tracks because she believes he is Amadioha, the god of lightning and thunder in Igbo cosmology, who is a diviner of justice. And that's kind of what the initial attachment to him. And then she ultimately ends up joining his church.
And she's trying to get out of her own prison, right? Get out of her own head, her own trauma, memories from what she endured in Nigeria during the war.
Yeah. He's so he she believes he's mystical, he's powerful, he has the answers, he has a way of divining justice, right? And so she seeks that out in him, and it also becomes her way out of the home.
So another character we have not touched on, but we need to talk about is Maxim, because we have Fidelis and Adobe, two parents who survived war in Nigeria, and then we have Maxim, whose father also survived war, although a very different one. It was the Soviet Ukrainian War. But he is also dealing with generational trauma on a different level. But we have these kids coming together who all have parents with these horrible memories and things that they've lived through and had to do to survive. Talk about Maxim and why you brought him into the book.
So when I mentioned at the very beginning that the initially the story began with a maxim, for me it was part of the inspiration of the actual novel. So I had a friend that I worked with in the summers, and we were having a conversation, just kind of chatty one day, and we both came upon the realization that we had fathers who had fought in wars, his in Vietnam and my father in Nigeria, and we knew about the secrecy around their experiences and the questions about whether they had been prisoners of war. And so I became interested in that, the idea of young people from different parts of the world connected through their experiences as a result of inheriting the war trauma. So I wanted to create a picture of two fathers who have very different ways of experiencing this PTSD as a result of the war. One father explosive, one father implosive. And so Maxim's father is the one that's quite explosive, and he and Amara connect through their shared experience as being children of prisoners of war and how they both handle it very differently.
If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. My guest today is Julie Iromuanya, and we are talking about her brand new novel, A Season of Light. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. Something we've been talking a lot about is children of prisoners of war, children of people who have survived war, what it's like to grow up in that shadow. And one of the questions that comes out of that, I think, is who is a hero and who is left behind? And you address that in the book. Could you please read for us?
Yeah. Finding his words, he bellowed, "I was just a boy. I did what they told me. I did what I had to do. I fought for our Biafra." And it wasn't enough. Adobe said softly, "Come now, Nkem. Let us finish this meal in peace." He looked at her, his eyes deep and mournful. "The heroes have died. We are all that remain."
Oh my God, that killed me. It killed me because the heroes have died. We are all that remain. You look at people who have died in a war, who have died fighting, they are the heroes. So, what are you if you're left and you're still alive? Can you be a hero if you're alive, if you survive? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, this notion of like the true heroes being the ones who made the ultimate sacrifice in their lives. And at least to Fidelis, he's questioning whether or not he can really, is he really a hero? Can he stand among the giants if he's still here? Right. And he had to pick up the pieces and keep going after that.
But it's heartbreaking to think that you can't be a hero if you survive.
Yeah, from Fidelis's point of view, right? From his understanding of the war. But I think that that's one of the things that he has to discover and search through on his journey throughout the novel is, that martyrdom isn't necessarily the way towards, I guess what one of the things he's struggling with is, was this worth it? What was the value of this? The great loss of this? And it's something that he carries with him every day as he continues on with his life. And could he be a hero to Ogochi, for example? She's gone, right? So he wasn't a hero to her. Can he be a hero to his family? Can he be a hero to this cause? So one of the things that he wants to do during the novel is to re-enter the fight, to go back, and so he becomes very invested in the happenings of the resurgent movement for the new Biafra because he wants to have his chance to reclaim that glory that was denied him.
In a sense, Fidelis and Amara, the mother and father, are always looking back in the past, or they're in the shadow of the past. And the two children, Chuk and Amara, are trying to grow up. They're trying to look forward. And in this sense, in a sort of strange way, they're all lost in their youth. They're all still trying to grow up. And that really does make this a coming of age novel. And, you're really focused on youth. Can you talk about that focus on youth, that what does it take to grow up?
Oh, that's that's a great question. I mean, I think that there's no easy answer to that. Part of it, I think, is recognitions and understandings of the world that were not there before. The small ones that happen, when things are slowly dawning on you, and the big recognitions, the big understandings of what the world is, how it works, and what your place is in the world. And I think each of the characters have to, in some way, navigate that and understand that.
So there's a real undercurrent in this novel, A Season of Light, an undercurrent of violence. There's always this, for me, as I was reading, there was this sort of fear, this trepidation that something was going to explode. If it's literal fireworks or guns or anger towards a child or a parent. And literally, the characters are learning how to fight. All of them have been learning how to fight. Talk about violence as this undercurrent to youth and growing up and sort of how that's affecting your characters.
I mean, one way of thinking about growing up is that there's a kind of violence that happens even when you think about like maturation in nature, a chrysalis bursting open for a butterfly to free itself. There's some kind of rupture that takes place, and a rupture is a kind of violence. And so I think that in all of the characters, there's some sort of rupture that has to take place for them to emerge with a newer, better understanding of the world.
And then when you emerge, I kept asking as I was reading, when you emerge from this, as you move forward, can you move forward without looking back? Or do you have to look back? Like, what do you do with that past, with that ghost of Ugochi? Are you trying to bury her and free yourself? Or can these characters move forward with her there with them?
I think the characters have to reintegrate. So the things that they've hidden and pushed behind them and locked up in boxes and attics, they have to take them out and look at them and sort through them and think about it and integrate it into their life. So in a way, can Ogochi walk by Fidelis' side by the end of the novel through their experience? Can they walk side by side rather than having her hidden and stored away?
And can you? I mean, I feel like I read the book, right, and I'm with the characters, and I'm thinking, "Can you do it? Can you live with the ghost by your side and still move forward?"
I hope so. I hope so. I think all of the characters have to answer that question in their own ways.
Yeah, I mean, I thought they were hopeful. When I finished the book, I was thinking, there is light at the end of this tunnel. These characters are going to move forward. They've figured out how to deal with the ghost, but there's still this question of are they still going to do it? Can they still get there? Talk to me about the title, A Season of Light. What does that mean for this book?
So, a season of light means many different things. One of the things it means in the book, the story takes place in Central Florida during the season of fires, and the season of fires is a period of within the in the spring when they have control fires that are set to protect that area from wildfires. And when you have fires, what fires do is they clear out the debris and the duff and all of that, and prevent it from becoming wild and out of control. So the story takes place during that time, and so it sort of symbolically represents what the family is going through. There's a period of light. There's a period when things that have been hidden are now exposed to the family, and they have to face them one way or another. And to not do that, to leave those things overgrown and hidden, would be to cause a wildfire to happen.
And they do. They explode in this book in many different ways. And at the heart of some of these explosions, we're watching in this novel, A Season of Light, we're watching Amara and Chuk grow up. And we're watching them literally learn how to fight. Maxim is teaching them how to punch secretly so that they can physically stand up for themselves. But there's also a brewing romance of sorts. Amara is trapped in her room, but she escapes and she thinks she's in love with Maxim. So talk about this sort of budding love and what the role of that is in the novel.
So Maxim is pretty much everything Amara's parents, especially her mother, want her to have nothing to do with. He's the child of the town drunk. He's not this educated, well-heeled young man of Igbo descent, but Amara falls in love with him partly because of the connection they have between their experiences. This is one person who has experience that feels very similar to her and very familiar. And so the two of them also hatch a plan to run away. He's trying to escape his father, she's trying to escape hers, and they feel that they can, if they leave together, they can build a new life somewhere else.
But they're going to run away. They're repeating exactly what their parents did. Everyone's running. Why?
I think that's the first thing that people wanna do often. When something happens, they wanna run away from it or hide from it, right? And I think it's the work of the author to force characters to face those things.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. My guest today is Julie Iromuanya, and we are talking about her brand new novel, A Season of Light. Julie, this book feels very, very close to your heart. We have ghosts, we have the violence, we have the 276 girls who were abducted. There's a lot of darkness. There is light. It's called A Season of Light because there is light at the end of the tunnel, but there's a lot of darkness. How hard was it to write this novel with all that darkness in it?
It was a very difficult book to write, and it took me a very long time to write it for that reason. So much in my life changed over that time, so much changed in the world over that course of that time. So it is really difficult to kind of stay in a place where you're open and receptive to the story coming to you, and also receptive to changing things and revision process and all of that. But it was difficult, especially because a lot of the things that are happening in the book are happening in real life. And so following very closely the experience of the schoolgirls who were kidnapped and some who never were returned home to their families and others who have gone out into the world and some who want to put this behind them. So some of it was just sort of following along with things that have been happening in the world, things that happened in Ukraine, things that are happening in Nigeria as well, some related to the war, but others that, other kinds of violence that continue to erupt. So I guess I felt a kind of hyper awareness about all these things that are going on because they were so important to the book.
And was it hard to write a book where one of the main characters, Amara, the 16-year-old girl, is trapped in her room by her father?
It was hard to write, but I have to say during the pandemic, I think I really, really felt like that was a point when that part of the book really, really grew because everybody was trapped in their homes at that time. I lived alone at the time, and I remember at times feeling such I'm an introvert, but I felt such a desire for connection, such a longing for connection. I would like go to CVS almost every day because that was one of the few places where you could go. And I know they got tired of seeing me because I would show up every time I had to pick up gum or something. And I think that like that was one of the things that helped me to tap into Amara's sense of loneliness and her longing for connection during her captivity.
You write Nigerian characters, and your parents came from Nigeria to the United States. So you have these deep roots there. Was it hard to tap into that too?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, because, I didn't want, and especially for the topic of the book, I didn't want Nigeria to only be connected to war. That's definitely something that a lot of writers of African descent face and think about in their art. So one of the things that I tried to do in exploring their connection to Nigeria was also explore the moments of levity and romance, the moments of romance between Adobe and Fidelis as they connected as young people. These moments of like lightness and humor in their past, the way that Ugochi played Cupid between Adobe and Fidelis, the brewing romance that developed between them, even at the same time when their families didn't want them together. I really tried to tap into other aspects of their being so that it wasn't just weighed down by the consequences of the war because people still live there, people have beautiful lives, people fall in love, they build families, all those things, and so I wanted that to be a part of their story too.
I feel like you did more than that. You like dug into your soul and put that on the page for us so that we could understand what this family was going through in this book, A Season of Light.
Yeah, there's a lot of heartache in the story, and I think that as I was writing, I also felt a lot of that heartache along with the characters. A lot of heartache, a lot of the feeling of loss too, because the dream of Biafra is still very much alive for a lot of descendants and a lot of survivors of the war. And so, I carry the weight of that too, and how I approach and think about the story too.
If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. My guest today is Julie Iromuanya. We're talking about her brand new novel, A Season of Light. You are an assistant professor in creative writing at the University of Chicago, so you have writing students probably in your office every day. You're talking to new writers, people who dream of publishing a book like A Season of Light. What advice do you have for people who are thinking about getting an MFA?
An MFA is a great tool for a writer, but it isn't everything. The main thing is that you need to write. And so if you're in an MFA program, you absolutely want to take advantage of that community that you have there, the other writers in the program, the faculty members, and stay connected with some of those people because that time, that 2 or 3 years is going to pass by so quickly. It seems like it takes a long time when you're there, but once it's gone, it feels like it went by so quickly. And so you want to make sure that you stay connected with people and stay engaged with that community of writers.
So, Julie, I understand you have a PhD in English. How does that help your writing?
When I was studied in my PhD program, I got a really broad view of the English discipline. And so I got experience working in different areas literature, rhetoric and composition, creative writing. And that was really, really helpful for me to think about like crafting story and various kinds of storytelling that exist. I got to read different kinds of text too, not just fiction, but nonfiction. I learned like really, really good research skills that have been very valuable to me. And I developed my own practice out of my experience writing the dissertation, writing the field exams, putting a field portfolio together, writing academic papers. All of that was really, really helpful in sharpening my tools as far as research, and then thinking about ways that that can inform my creative writing.
It's so impressive. You are so deeply enmeshed in the writing community. You have your PhD, you have an MFA, you are a professor. And in addition to all that, you have won all sorts of fellowships and done all sorts of residencies, which is this amazing gift that writers can apply for, where we are paid to write or paid to go to these beautiful places to write and have this time. In particular, here in New Hampshire, of course, we have the MacDowell Colony that you've spent time at. Can you talk to us about these residencies, these fellowships, and what sort of advice you have for writers who are just starting out?
Oh, I absolutely love my experience at MacDowell Colony. I think like one of the best things about writing residencies and retreats is that you have a couple of things. So you have the isolation and time to yourself to just write and create, but then you also get the social part, which is engaging with other writers or other artists of different disciplines and like having these really, really great conversations. So what the way that your day is usually spent is you'll spend a part of your day in your room working alone, writing, and then usually in the evenings, you'll have time, or at the meals, you'll have times to meet with other people and talk about your work. And we have these readings in the evenings where people will share their work in progress. And that's like one of the highlights of that time. And you're there with amazing people working on very, very different projects. And so it's also exciting to like hear about a book or something and remember that that person was working on it when you were there. The other real nice thing about MacDowell Colony is they have this tradition, so you're each assigned a cabin that you go to. So it's like a cabin in the woods, and every day they bring you your lunch in this basket and they deliver it to you on your porch. And so it feels you feel very special. You know, you're tucked away in this beautiful private landscape in this cozy room. Your lunch is brought to you. You have time to write and to think. And it's a space that like really tries hard to keep things analog. So most of the places don't have access to Wi-Fi. The only place is like the library. And so you like physically have to leave that space to do that, which means that when you're in that room, you're alone with your thoughts. And so you have to really sit down and you can't escape them. You've got to write, you've got to create. And it's such a beautiful space to create in.
You're really highlighting the importance of writers. We sit in a room alone, we
Mhm,
think, we write,
mhm.
but then we can't do it without a community.
Right.
And it seems like you really have spent a lot of time building those two pieces.
Yeah, and I should add, I mean, I had the fortune of seeing Toni Morrison in one of her last appearances. The late Toni Morrison, she came there and was receiving an award and talked about her work, and so that was a huge privilege. So, you know, you have just a great opportunity to connect with different people and learn about their work and those who are like the people that you admire the most too.
These residencies and fellowships are very competitive, and almost everyone is rejected. So, what advice do you have for people who just keep getting rejected?
You just keep applying. There are some residencies that I had to apply to several times before I got in. You just keep applying.
Keep applying, keep applying. Everybody keeps applying. What advice do you have for new writers?
I think new writers, the most important thing is to write. Create a space or time, physical space or just space and time to sit down and to write. It takes a lot of work to do that, but it's so important.
Julie Iromuanya, thank you so much for joining me here on Check This Out. I've loved talking to you.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novel Atomic Anna. You've been listening to Check This Out, where we dive deeply into the works of emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. This conversation is a partnership between New Hampshire Public Radio and the Penn Faulkner Foundation. Penn Faulkner administers major literary awards and public programs, including the Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction. I'll be back next week with Tova Mirvis. We'll be talking about her brand new debut thriller, We Would Never. Our producer today is Jessica Hunt. Penn Faulkner's executive director is Gwydion Sullivan. NHPR's program director is Emily Quirk. This show is sponsored by C&S Wholesale Grocers family of companies, the podcast Totally Booked with Zibby, the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation, and the Howe Library Corporation. Remember to go to your local library or local bookstore and check out all the books you hear about here and love. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you next time.